Uh-oh. What's it doing? Oh, it is. Can you look on your phone just to make sure? It did something weird, but it's saying we're live. So I guess we're live.
Check it out.
Okay. I need a cameraman, but I'm that man. All right, welcome everyone to this reading of historical fiction. We have three great authors for you. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, along with my lovely partner, Donna Jokum. We are an all-volunteer queer bookstore that opened in 2012, and we've been here at the center since 2014. So we have a suggested donation of $10, but we always say give what you can, if you can. And if you'd rather support us by buying books, we encourage you to save your money and do that. But if you've got it and you're able to throw something in, we very much appreciate it. It helps us to keep the place fully stocked, buy equipment and all the things needed to keep this ship afloat. You can also send us payment at Venmo at BGSQD. And you'll see my name, Greg Newton, on there because I can't figure out how to get my name removed and make it just the Bureau. So I'll pass that around. If you're not already on our email list and you would like to be, you can sign up for that at the register and you'll get an email every other Monday about our many upcoming events. And before I read the bio of our first reader, I wanted to read a land acknowledgement. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. We also want to recognize that at this very moment, the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people by the state of Israel is actively supported by our government with our tax dollars. We hope that you will join us in calling for a ceasefire and swift delivery of food, water, medicine, and fuel to the people of Gaza. So I want to introduce our first reader. Stephanie Cowell has been an opera singer, balladeer, founder of Strawberry Opera and other arts venues, including a Renaissance Festival in NYC. She is the author of Nicholas Cook, The Physician of London, The Players, a novel of the young Shakespeare, Mary Mozart, Claude and Camille, a novel of Monet, and The Boy in the Ring. Her work has been translated into 9 languages and made into an opera. Stephanie is the recipient of an American Book Award. She has lived in NYC all her life. Please give her a very warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's totally amazing to be here. It's totally wonderful. And to bring this world of my heart in 1901 in the Midlands of England, Nottinghamshire, to this wonderful place on 13th Street, New York City. So my story, The Boy in the Rain, and I had myself on there. I want to time myself. I'm not calling anybody. I just want to time myself. My sister once called me in the middle of a reading. I forgot to turn it off. I'm terribly embarrassed.
That's a good reminder.
See, Jenny, I can't talk now. I don't know why I didn't send a message. I was so startled. I just picked it up. How are you? I did get over it now. Since then, I try to remember. Anyway, so this book is the love of my heart, and it came to me in kind of a mirage, if you will, seeing about 40 years ago, seeing two men, one slightly older, on some wooden steps in a country house. And I walked past them and I felt extremely startled. And when I went to join my friends, I felt as if I'd been in another world. And the story began to form, and I told it to two friends of mine, and they said, "You're going to write this story down. We dare you, we give you a wager." And I said, "Okay, I'll do it." So I went back home and I did this rough, horrible little sketch, but they said it was very, very intense, very passionate, and I kept working on it for a long, long time. And finally, after 39 years, during a period in which I published several other novels, I finally put the concluding version of this one. It has a long, long journey, and I'm so glad to share some of it with you today. So my heroes, my protagonists are Robbie, who is a 18, 19-year-old boy who's lives with his uncle, who is a tailor and wants Robbie to follow his work, and Robbie only wants to draw. And there's a huge, huge, huge fight between the two of them, and Robbie is sent away to live with an older clergyman, which was what clergymen did back then. The country clergymen, as they took in boys to tutor in Latin and Greek, and so they could get them into university. And Robbie doesn't want to go to university, he wants to be an artist, but he figures it's the best way out of the house. And down the street, down the pathway, there's a house that is empty. And eventually, a few months into the story, Anton comes home. Anton is almost 30, very beautiful, very messed up. What he presents on the outside is nothing like he is inside. Like he doesn't know who he is inside. Anyway, so Robbie, of course, who knows very well what he likes, is very smitten with this totally beautiful man. And Anton is kind of not very in touch with himself or anything like that. But anyway, Anton agrees to go for a walk with Robbie. What Robbie doesn't know is that Anton is literally falling apart inside and has just come back from having a serious breakdown. So he is waiting in the rain to take a walk with this beautiful man. And I suppose he's very innocent at that time. He hasn't had anything to do with anyone really. And I suppose he's hoping something will come of it. Shadows crossed the house and twilight came, and after that early darkness, he crossed the small bridge and walked a little down the path that was bordered by low stone walls. Under his hand, the stones grew familiar. He ran his fingers along them, experiencing the peculiar disorientation that always came with his illnesses and fevers. Darkness folded in upon the path and field. Rain was coming, the trees dipped slightly. We can't walk if it rains, he thought, now standing at the house door. Perhaps we'll sit by the fire and talk. I'll take 2 glasses of the port if he offers it. I'll sit so close that the back of my hand will graze his. But he mustn't see that I'm sick, or he'll send me home. Robbie had no idea how much time had passed, because it was too dark to read his pocket watch. Then he heard the horse's hooves striking the wood slats of the bridge. Anton was coming at last. Robbie waited near the door as Anton pulled his mare into the stable. He came forward, stumbling a little towards his door, and Robbie emerged from the shadows and burst out, "Hello, here I am." Anton stared at him, feeling for the door, swaying a little, reaching out to grasp the wood. The stare was bitter. Robbie thought, "Oh God, he's drunk." He had no idea what to do. And then Anton turned his back and muttered, "What the hell are you doing here? Go back where you belong and stop following me." Robbie turned suddenly and ran toward the high grass behind the house. Thunder came from far away in the deeper part of the forest, and he ran toward it. Now it had begun to pour, and he ran on, stumbling on the roots of a tree and falling, bruising his leg. He was crying hard. The rain beat at him, soaking his shirt. He thought, I'm never going back there, never, not there or to Langstaff. I don't know where I'll go, but I'll never go there again. He could hardly see where he went. He stumbled again. By the lightning, he made out a half-fallen stone cottage that he had climbed about a few times. Most of the roof was gone long ago, but a fragment remained, and he crawled to that corner and huddled there. He shivered so hard he thought, I'll probably die, but I don't care. He was a fool. It was like that master whom he thought liked him. He had gone to the office door and the man had stared coldly at him and said, what do you want, boy? After all the gentle teasing Robbie had been given, all those signs that said, come here, meant nothing then and nothing now. He might have slept, but he was next aware that the thunder had moved away and the rain fell more softly. Through the darkness came the gleam of a wavering light. Robbie gazed through the broken windows. He didn't see the face of the man coming toward him through the gaping hole of a door, but he knew him anyway. I thought you'd be here, Anton said wearily. I used to hide in this place. I'm more sober. Come on now, you young fool. Don't you call me that. I wasn't the one who... Robbie rose haltingly to his feet and struck out at Anton's chest and shoulders, his fist hitting the slick, rubbery mackintosh. The lantern had fallen to the ground, and what he struggled against now were the arms which pinned his own by holding him closely. He shouted, don't touch me, let me go. Anton said, you'll knock both of us in the mud. We're wet enough here without that. He slowly removed his arms, opened his mackintosh, and pulled half of it over Robbie. Christ, he said, you are sick as hell. The old man's half lost his senses, worrying over you. I have to try to light the lantern once more. Walk with me, lad, it's all right. It's not all right, Robbie thought. It will never be now. They slipped several times going back through the field and didn't speak one word until they finally reached the vicar's gate. Robbie lifted the latch and walked alone through the garden to the cottage where his tutor was waiting for him. Going a little bit, the book is written in alternating points of view between Robbie and Anton. And this is just a little section that shows you a little bit of what is going on in Anton's head. Anton, when he was 16 at school, had a brief affair with a boy, and his father guessed, and of course called him all kinds of names. And he was horrified. He pulled away from it, and for 14 years, since 13 years, he's never allowed himself to go anywhere near a man. Now in his dark study, Anton breathed deeply, hand around his glass of whiskey. He thought of those few months in the school when he had told himself, it's better it's done. Mother would never believe it, but my father suspects and despises me. You'll never be a man. You'll come to nothing, his father had mocked him, and Anton set out to prove himself to the world. He was very successful in all work he chose. He courted women and slept with them when he could. He knew he had pleased them. He was the sort of man women dreamed of, or so one girl had told him. He married. Yet, at times through the years, he would notice some young man looking at him carefully across the room. The boy in Oxford, that blonde fellow he'd met in Zurich in a wine cellar at one of those long tables, and the banker who assisted him in London. The last was the most difficult. Behind the closed door of his office, he had covered his face with his hands and prayed, forcing his body tight until all feeling left him. Hold my hand, Anton wanted to say, but he remained silent. And of course, all this silence has brought him to a terrible impasse, which his dear old friend, the vicar, the reverend, who took him in and befriended him when he was a brutalized boy, and is still looking after him. He knows a little bit, but nobody knows, not even the reader, until way in the book. So I've got about 8 minutes more, and it's very, very hard to decide what of this book I'm going to read. So Anton finally begins to allow himself to realize what he's feeling, and it's not going to go away. And he's quite scared because Robbie is so vulnerable. He's 19, but he knows nothing. It was in the days hard to conceive back then how innocent people could be. I mean, it was when the Oscar Wilde catastrophe happened, which was actually just a few years before this. Most people didn't believe it. They didn't know such a thing existed. And those men or women who knew very well what it was kept it to themselves, because at that time they were, of course, living in England under the gross indecency laws, which if you were convicted of even kissing a man, kissing another man, you could go to prison with hard labor for 2 years, which happened to between 50 and 60,000 men, and pretty much in many cases ruin their lives, ruin their health and their position, and many died early. It was a great, great tragedy. And of course, Robbie is living at this time. So just a few words. When they finally do get to take a walk in the woods, and by this time Anton's got a picnic basket, and he doesn't know what he expects, but he just wants to be close to this boy who was so sensitive and so open and so adoring of him. And so they go off in the autumn into the countryside. Anton looked about at the pond where the turtle splashed. He said playfully, "We should make a bargain. I'll tell you something of me if you tell me something of you." "You first then," Robbie said eagerly. "Let's walk," said Anton. Anton picked up the basket and they went on. And after a time he said, "I was in Rome one, quite alone. It was after my grandmother died, before I went to Switzerland. And I felt myself the only person in the world in the midst of crowds. I wish you'd been there. It would have been nice to show the city to you, the rooms of the forum where the emperors walked." "I want so much to see Rome," said Robbie. "Rob, it's your turn to say something of you." Robbie stopped walking and frowned. "I need some time." "Do you? Then let's go on," Anton answered. They walked a few minutes, Anton holding onto Robbie's arm. He kicked a heap of leaves beneath the tree, and Robbie laughed and kicked another. Then Robbie stopped. His shoulders hunched, he murmured, "May I say just one thing about me, or can it be more than one? Though I hardly have the courage for one." "You can say as many as you like," said Anton. "You won't be bored?" asked Robbie. "Not at all." So they do talk a great, and they start to really open up to one another as people, and the tension between them dissolves. But Robbie is staying a bit aloof, and Anton pours wine, and looking down at it, swirled it slightly, and the sun had disappeared. He glanced at Robbie, who had hunched his shoulders, cradling his wine glass protectively in both hands. Was he pulling away? He moved a few inches apart. But Robbie only murmured in a deep voice, "This is what I really need to say about me. The truest thing. I want things too much. If only feelings didn't run away with me." "Then you wouldn't draw," said Anton. Anton hesitated and then slipped his hand under Robbie's hair, finding the nape of his neck. He could feel the shiver that went through the young artist. "Do you mind, Rob?" he asked softly. Robbie swallowed. "No, I like it," he said. "Now tell me more about you," said Anton. Robbie arched a little toward the hand. "Well, then, I care about things too much. I wish I didn't. I want to be needed too much. I want to be anyone else but me." Anton said, "And who would you like to be, eh?" Robbie looked up from the wine. His eyes were so dark, only a sort of longing could be seen in them. "I'd like to be like you," he said. That was it then. Anton pulled Robbie to him and kissed him. He lowered Robbie to the blanket, feeling the the chipped tooth with his tongue. Robbie wound his arms tightly around Anton and kissed him back as if parched, bringing his leg around Anton's to force him closer. Anton's heart pounded faster until his chest was so tight he could hardly breathe. He turned his head and murmured, "God, what possessed me? Enough, Rob." He tried to disentangle himself, but Robbie held him tightly, crying, "Don't go, please don't go." Anton rose to his feet. Robbie scrambled to his knees, trying to catch his hand, saying, don't. But Anton suddenly held up his hand in warning. Robbie rose to his feet, looking in the same direction through the trees. A man and a woman in their middle years appeared on the path, walking closely, both carrying baskets full of sweet chestnuts. Their clothes were old and limp, their shoes broken. "Oh, good day, sirs," the man said, reaching up and lifting his wool cap respectfully. "Good day," Anton said. His voice hardly sounded like his own. "Been nutting a lot, will still fall." "Yes," said Anton, "in December sometimes. I used to go nutting." "The day's lovely for it now," said the man. "Well, good day, sir." Anton glanced at Robbie, who was paler beneath his freckles. They both stood motionless until the footsteps were far off and the voices faded down the path. Robbie murmured, "Oh God." They nearly hit. Anton stood straight. "What happened before," he said, "it was a moment of madness. I have no idea why. You must forgive me, best forgotten." So that's a little part of the. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Lance Ringel is a two-time Lammy nominee whose novels and plays bring gay history to life through vivid, realized characters and meticulously researched detail. His debut novel, Flower of Iowa, about an American soldier and a British soldier who fall in love on the Western Front in World War I, received multiple literary accolades, including the Forward Indies Book of the Year Award for War and Military Fiction. Floridian Nights, his second novel, is an intense, multifaceted love story that unfolds against the backdrop of the AIDS epidemic of the late 1980s. In consecutive years, each of these novels was named as a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award in Gay Romance. Ringel's plays include In Love with the Arrow Collar Man, about famed illustrator J.C. Leyendecker. Did I say that right? We just saw his show. And his Leyendecker, and his model, muse, and lover, Charles Beach. And Flash Frozen, a drama based on true events about two champion male skaters whose lives faithfully intersect around the tragic 1961 plane crash that killed the entire US figure skating world team. Both plays have enjoyed successful runs to considerable acclaim in New York. Please welcome Lance.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me make sure. I apologize for my hoarse voice, so I'm going to stand a little closer to the microphone. I usually do. I want to start, first of all, with a few acknowledgements of my own. First of all, to Donnie and Greg and BGSQD, because this is, I believe, the 5th time that I've been hosted here or at one of their sites, and they do wonderful things for the community, and I will mention them. Secondly, Stephanie Cowell and I have been friends for like 35 years, and I've been reading her books for 30 years, and we finally get to be on the same presentation together, so that's really good. And Sebastian, I am so excited for you because it's your debut novel, and thank you so much for all you've done and for having both Stephanie and me as your guests for your debut. Last but certainly not least, it is an honor to do a reading from my book, Flower of Iowa, the weekend of Veterans Day. I'm going to say about that. So let me take you to summer of 1918. We just looking for the right page, hang on. Tommy Flowers from Brooklyn, Iowa is 18 years old. and he goes to France to fight in the First World War on the Western Front. He becomes best buddies with an English soldier, also 18, named David Pearson. And it's important for the context here. Stephanie actually set me up nicely with it about how innocent people were back then. It was very normal, very not looked upon askance for men to be physically very close, sleeping together literally, maybe, without any sexual overtones to that. And they have had that kind of friendship from the moment they met, practically. So they're best buddies. And then some circumstances conspire to bring them from France to England. David is wounded rather badly in a aerial attack where they are in France. And Tommy, through a series of machinations, ends up in England as well. And they have just gone from London by 2 trains to David's hometown of Dunster in southwest England. And when they arrive, they get sort of a, from Tommy's point of view, not so warm welcome from his mother and sister. Tommy's a little vocal about that. And he and David end up in David's room. And they, once before, when they were out in France, Tommy impulsively kissed David and they kind of both laughed it off. This time they've just been in David's room and started kissing a little more seriously, just beginning to realize maybe there's something else going on here. And David's mother calls him down to supper. And that's where we start this chapter. Mercifully, Mrs. Pearson had placed David and Tommy opposite each other, and the 4 of them proceeded to have a pleasant supper comprising turnips, some potatoes, carrots, and peas, all stewed with a very little bit of mutton, something Tommy had never tasted. The bread, he couldn't help noticing, was of the same gray variety as he'd seen before in England. He'd hoped for better at a bakery, but back on his best behavior, didn't dream of mentioning it. On the other hand, Betty, who sat like a smoldering dark cloud at her end of the table, had no such compunctions. They were well through the meal, with Tommy relating the composition of his family back in America to Mrs. Pearson, when the daughter of the household said, apropos of nothing, "I'm sick of this rotten potato bread." Breaking the awkward silence that followed this outburst, Mrs. Pearson said, "We're all sick of many things, dear. 'Tis a sacrifice we all have to make. 'Tisn't much compared with what your brothers and Mr. Flowers here had to put up with." Not cowed, Betty turned a resentful face to Tommy and said, "You don't eat gray bread made from potatoes in America, do you?" "Why not? Our bread's made from wheat. Ours used to be wheat too before the war. Now we can't afford it. Only rich Americans can." "I'm not a rich American, Miss Pearson. All Americans are rich, or they're getting rich off the likes of us." "Betty, you're being rude." It was David, sternly cutting through the conversation. She grew silent, evidently intimidated by this comment from her brother. But then he tried to add a little levity. "When the war's over and I come home, we shan't have any more potato bread here at the bakery. It'll only be wheat bread, I promise." Betty made a brief, angry, inchoate "ugh" sound and stood up, saying, "Excuse me, Mom," then stormed out. They all listened as she marched up the stairs and down the hall to her bedroom. Had any of Tommy's sisters behaved so in front of company, his mother would have been mortified for a minimum of 1 week, and his father would have soundly spanked her. But Mrs. Pearson remained relatively untroubled. While acknowledging with a nod her daughter's inappropriate behavior, she said with a shrug, "She's just become impulsive." "Why?" Tommy asked from genuine interest, and he felt David give him a swift, if not particularly hard, kick under the table with his good leg. Rather than being annoyed by this, Tommy found himself enjoying the renewed physical contact, and he telegraphed that with a quick smile to David, who had to turn away because of the grin it aroused in him, even though he meant the kick. "It's all the deaths, you see," David's mother, oblivious, began, and now Tommy could see David's point. "Perhaps I'll go up and try to talk with her," David interrupted brightly, in an obvious attempt to derail his mother's train of thought. As he rose, he added, "Tommy, you haven't told Mom about Susan." It struck Tommy as especially out of place. His mind and heart were fixed wholly on David, and he didn't feel like discussing a girl thousands of miles away. But when Mrs. Pearson naturally, politely asked who this Susan was, he found himself rattling on about his girl in Iowa. "You're engaged to be married then," she said. "Oh, no, ma'am, we're not exactly." "Oh, well, I've always thought, everyone's always expected." Mrs. Pearson reached over to pat his hand. "When you get back home, I understand." He wondered if Colin or Doug had been engaged. He knew Betty had, but he didn't want to bring her up. That reticence proved unnecessary when raised voices, Betty's and David's, drifted down from upstairs. Mrs. Pearson sighed and shook her head. I knew that won't work. Those two have never got along, not really. How come? You said you had sisters, 3, wasn't it? Tommy nodded and she continued, do they all get on with each other and with you? Absolutely. David and Betty's mother suddenly got that look of staring off into space, like the lady on the train yesterday morning. They're the 2 youngest, you see. She always looked up to her older brothers. So did he. He still does. She seemed pleased that Tommy knew this. But she doesn't look up to him. She's older than him. It seemed a weak explanation, so Tommy felt prompted to ask, is there anything else? Oh, I don't know. David didn't approve of you. She had dropped the H in pronouncing the name, and Tommy was momentarily taken aback. What do you mean he didn't approve of me? Not you. You Collins, Betty's beau. Oh, sorry. But Doug didn't approve of him neither. Colin didn't mind. Now, anyways, now they're all gone. Colin, Doug, you, all except David. Sometimes I think she resents David coming round and playing the boss with her. She related all this in a voice remarkably steady, considering she was discussing 2 dead sons and 1 potential son-in-law who was also lost. Then she seemed to snap out of her faraway trance, cutting a different look at Tommy. Understand, if anything happened to him, she'd go wild. It would be, she can't take 1 more, she can't, and neither can I, but we're not the sort to show it. In Tommy's opinion, David had a damaged leg to prove something had happened to him already, but he knew she meant something much more final, and his sympathies were shifting back to David's family. They did love their youngest after all, he realized, and David knew it even if he, Tommy, had failed to recognize it. He had no sooner completed this thought than David's mother said, they were such unusual boys, Tommy, Colin and Doug. Once again, straining to remain cordial, he noted, David said Doug always had a lot of girls. He did. Colin was our oldest and Doug was so special. I happen to think David's special too, Tommy blurted out. So handsome. That's why there were so many girls. She paused long enough for the novel thought to surface in Tommy's mind that he thought David was handsome. At least he knew better than to say that. But Mrs. Pearson had returned to the subject of her youngest after a fashion. You're always speaking up for David. It's so nice. He's needed that. Obviously, Tommy thought, but he said, everybody needs that. As they finished this exchange, the object of their discussion came trudging down the back stairs and solemnly rejoined them at their table. No luck? Tommy inquired cheerfully, and David scowled and shook his head. Alarmed that the spirit between the 2 of them might have been spoiled, Tommy pressed, should I speak to her? David looked at him as though he thought the Yank had thoroughly lost his mind, but on second consideration, he said, tomorrow, perhaps, not tonight. Reading into that what he wanted to hear, Tommy replied, of course, not tonight. The slightest spark in David's eye told Tommy the former had caught his meaning. To confirm it, Pearson half smiled and shook his head, looking away. Time to clear this away, Mrs. Pearson announced, breaking the ensuing quiet. Do you need help? Tommy asked. Betty usually does, David interjected, and Tommy reminded him, but she's not tonight. That's true, David said, largely to himself. Then he asked his mother, shall we help, Mum? She looked dumbfounded, then nodding at Tommy, told her son, you should stick with him. He's got good manners, that one, and it's rubbing off on the likes of you. But no, now she addressed Tommy, you've done enough women's work for one day. To the both of them, she added, I can manage these. Then to David again, you'll be wanting to take Tommy to the pub now anyways. I don't know, Mom. We're both tired. Word's round the village. They'll be expecting you at the Stag's Head. David looked over at Tommy. Neither one wanted to go out, and they both sensed it. But just a little while then, David said. And while they're at the pub, I'll take a drink. Better. 2 hours later, Tommy and David were staggering a little as they finally broke free of the pub and headed outside into the night air. So much had happened since the morning that Tommy felt as though he'd been awake for days. They were both trying to keep their balance, keep their voices down, keep from laughing in the manner of the slightly inebriated. They had stumbled the few houses back to Pearson's family bake shop when Flowers looked up and just like that, sobered up. Davy, he said solemnly. What? Pearson responded with a half-drunken laugh. Then he felt Tommy's arms grip him and turn him bodily, so he was facing the heavens. Look at the stars, was all the Yank said. and doing so had the exact same effect on the Briton, who simply said, "Cool." "Do you remember when you told me about how you went out to the country to see the comet?" Recalling that entire evening, David replied, "How could I forget that?" "Do you think you could take me there, where you said you all went? Is it far?" Tommy's eyes were a glitter in the moonlight, partly with alcohol, but mostly with other things. Seeing this, David said, "It isn't far at all. We could go there right now." "Then let's. Follow me," David said, both of them suddenly as businesslike as if they'd been ordered out on a night raid. They returned back up West Street with David in the lead, then cut through the churchyard, then down a lane under a stone arch. Intoxicated with drink, the night, the village, David and himself, Tommy said with loud cheeriness, "You always know the way," but his pal shushed him. The giddiness was superseded by seriousness of purpose as they traversed around a circular stone building. "The Dovecote," David informed him in a whisper, then under a second stone arch and past several houses with thatched roofs. At the end of the lane, they took a path that ran alongside a field which sloped sharply upward to a wood. David hopped a stile in a fence, showing Tommy how to do it, and they began walking through neat rows of crops. The ground swelled ever higher, and just at the edge of the woods, David turned about. "Here we are," he said, coming to a standing halt so unexpected that Tommy bumped into him. Then, as Tommy turned round, the reason became clear. 180-degree vista, breathtaking even in the nighttime, taking in Munster and the hills below. Sorry. With the ground now moist with evening dew, neither one was inclined to sit or lie down, and Tommy came around back of David and naturally slipped his arms around his friend, reversing what they'd done back at the house. A different fit, equally comfortable. "Do you know we're facing south and east?" David said as Tommy nuzzled the top of his head. The observation caused the American to look up and out. "I used to fancy when I was little that I could see all the way to France, because if you go far enough south and east from here, that's where you would land." Tommy tightened his hold on David, finally said, "Can we not talk about France for the next couple of days?" David stirred, looked back at him. "I wasn't thinking of it that way, but it's odd not to, isn't it? I mean, the sky here is no more magnificent than that night we were out in France, you and me, but the old countryside's so different." Tommy was trying to push the parts of that night he didn't care to remember, the dogs, the airplane, and above all, the makeshift cemetery, from his mind. "What's different here is everything's at peace," he said. "How can you say that, Tommy?" David cried, breaking free from his embrace and turning completely back around to face him. "You can see how the war's changed everything here, even if you've never been here before. You're much too bright not to notice." Concentrating, picking his words carefully, since David was so insistent on having this discussion right now, Tommy answered, "Sure, the war's changed things here, even more than it's changed things back home in Brooklyn. And it's even changed some things there. But no one's fighting here. There's no danger right here, right now. That's the difference. And that makes all the difference in the world." They were both cold sober now. After a pause, it was David who reached out, entwining his arms around Tommy's waist and leaning his head against the Yank's chest. "I suppose you're right. You remember that night, though, don't you?" "All of it, as clear as yesterday, but I don't want to talk about it right now." "No? What do you want to do then?" David asked, looking up at him not a little flirtatiously. "I think I know what I want to do," Tommy replied in a husky voice, "but I don't want to talk about that either." More tentatively than before, David reached up, brushed Tommy's hair and then his cheek. Once that happened, they both lost their hesitation and started romancing in the moonlight, like many a couple who no doubt had stood here before them, but unlike them too. They had just relaxed into each other's hold when there was a sudden faint rustling noise in the woods up above them. Unlike the sound of David's mother calling them for supper, it caused them both to jump. Tommy grabbed David's hand, an urgent grip, and motioned with his head. "Let's go back," he said, with an imperative tone David couldn't deny and had no desire to anyway. Hand in hand, they walked back into town in agitated silence and let go of each other as they crept through the deserted streets, across the churchyard, down West Street, and back into the dark bakery. As they ascended the double flight of stairs again, David whispers, "I got to use the loo and brush my teeth, of course." "Of course," Tommy said, and they both tried to cover their laughter, remembering their previous discussion of English soldiers and their aversion to toothbrushes. Then each recalled to himself that they'd had the talk after a trip to the bathhouse, while lying naked on the grass in the French sunshine, and their anxiousness increased. Tommy waited upstairs, then descended to the loo himself after David returned. Now he did tiptoe. When he reascended, the curtains to both windows and the upstairs rooms had been drawn, although they could have easily have been left open on such a warm night. And a soft light was glowing within. David sat on the edge of the bed in his underclothes, much as he'd been dressed that first night in the stable. Tommy quickly shed his own outer clothes and sat down on the bed next to him. They'd said very little since standing on the hillside, and each still felt just a tad insecure about what would happen next. So, David finally asked, "What do you think, mate?" Tommy looked at David, looked at himself, cleared his throat, looked back to David, and took the final risk. "I think it's much too warm in here to wear underwear to bed. What do you think?" David responded by standing up and peeling off his underwear. As he watched Tommy do the same, he whispered, "I think we must try to be very quiet with what with me will insist right below us." Both thoroughly aroused, they made an initial exploration of each other's bodies standing, running the flats of their palms over one another. It was the first time Tommy had seen David's leg, the skin of which was a frightening collection of zigzags and stripes. When he knelt to examine it more closely, David tried half-heartedly to break away and douse the light. "Now," Tommy declared in a whisper, and he began to massage the injured limb, first with his hands, then with his mouth. David shivered, ran his fingers through Tommy's hair, called his name questioningly. "What? Can we get into bed now? I don't want it all to go too fast." Tommy rose and kissed him, and now he was the one who turned to put out the light, saying, "Me neither."
A little warm in here. Sebastian de Russell was educated at Duke Ellington School of the Arts and the International Center of Photography. An award-winning photographer and speaker, his images traveled the globe in the 9/11 exhibition, Here is New York, a democracy of photographs. He has penned for Where Magazine, In New York, City Guide, Travel Weekly, City Info, and the New York Times. Burning with a Blue Flame is the first novel by Sebastian Durell. Duro Russell, I contracted your name. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you, thank you. Hello, New York. On this Veterans Day weekend, I want to thank the Bureau. I also want to thank Stephanie Cowell and Lance Ringel for supporting me today and reading with you for LGBT historical fiction, Reclaiming Our Voices. As historians, hold on. Our three novels, taken collectively, actually occupy the first quarter of the 20th century. And though they are set in different locations, what they have in commonality is they share a love story at their epicenter. As historians, I see our roles as writing the LGBT past by revealing our characters in times when they were not historically documented in literature. So by literary time travel, we can reclaim our voices and then give them the wings to fly. Burning with a Blue Flame is an American novel. It is set in 1925 on Daytona Beach, and it's centered around a bromance between a race car driver and an ex-World War I barnstorming pilot. Let me read to you the BBC on the back, because I'll give you a blurb here. Pilot Elm Darrell gets the jaunt of his life after agreeing to compete against race car driver Humboldt Bratka in the latest craze, speed. As each man seeks to outdistance his past, their passions collide against a roaring backdrop of speakeasies, mass balls, and jazz. Will Elm fall for the flapper wing walker Zella? Will Bolt fall for the vamp race car driver Veronica? Or will the birds get left behind in a trail of dust that leads from New York to Hollywood? I first became enamored with the 1920s when I was attending Duke Ellington School of the Arts in Georgetown. And though I was a theater major, I actually wanted to be a photographer as well, or a writer. And F. Scott Fitzgerald was my idol, and I read everything by him I could get my hands on. And it was in 1992, when I first moved to New York City, that I tried to write my first 1920s novel. I only got as far as a short story and my author photo, which I still use, which was me spoofing an image from a book on the jazz age. So fast forward like Stephanie, 27 years later, I was living in a new city and I had a new partner, and it all came back to me, and it said, you are going to write a 1920s novel, and you are going to set it in the world's most famous beach, Daytona. So that was fine, except I didn't know anything about race car drivers or airplane pilots. So I had to go start researching. And so it was copious research to figure out how to even just get someone in an airplane and get it off the ground. It took me 2 weeks to write like 2 sentences. So I finally started working on it. And what I was discovering through my research was Florida is steeped in the folklore of the 1920s. For instance, Ormond is called the birthplace of speed, and racing on the beach there started in 1902 from Ormond to Daytona Beach all the way down to Ponce Inlet. And when I was house hunting myself, I saw houses for sale. One had been owned by Al Capone, and one had been owned by Bill McCoy, who's known as the real McCoy. You could still find his rum for sale. And he was called the real McCoy because he could get the real alcohol. He could get rum from Cuba, and he could deliver it all the way up the Intercoastal Waterway to New York. Also in Ormond, I discovered a beer hall that had been a speakeasy in the 1920s, and it still operates. So this one particular place, Billy's Tap Room, has been around for 100 years. One other thing is hold on, let me see a cue card here. Oh yes, okay. This is important. The setting for your novel, where you choose to place it, if it's written correctly, it will become another character in your novel. And I also believe that by rewriting the past, you would also rewrite the future and the now. Prohibition was born, it created the birth of the speakeasies. And I eventually came to look at speakeasies as the gay bars of the lost generation. It was kind of a coming out experience to come into this secretive bar and to see people of all ilk. You could run into people who were rich, people who were Black, people who were gay, mafia characters, all convening in the same place. So to me, that was like a coming out to everybody. And you also had secret passwords to get in. And it was kind of like a post-war emancipation that happened in the 20s, and not just for women, but for the age of Victorian stuffiness. And instead, it burst forth with this new lingo, this new style, this new music, and these new dance crazes. As my novel started to progress, I noticed a distinct synchronicity to the previous century. COVID was mirroring the Spanish flu influenza of 1918. Juneteenth in Roseville was reflecting Black Lives Matter. I saw Big Pharma as the result of what's happening in my book, the beginning of tuberculosis asylums and rehabilitation centers from men coming home from the war. I wanted to make social commentary through my characters. And I believe, okay, here are a few of the men and the women who, through their fiction, changed our LGBT historical past. Oscar Wilde, Virginia Woolf, Willa Cather, Christopher Isherwood, Evelyn Waugh, Ian Forrester, Gore Vidal, Anne Rice, Armistead Maupin. And on behalf of myself and my two comrades here, I would say that we are deeply honored to be considered under the umbrella with these esteemed writers. Okay, we'll don the hat for this one. By the way, it was somewhere between, I think, my first and second rewrite that I became totally possessed by my lead character, Elm, and I started dressing like him, and I've pretty much done it since. I'm going to read you the dedication because this is for my partner, Michael, who inspired this novel. He is at home with the dogs and the chickens and my mother. Michael, since I first met you in a moonlight garden fair, Cupid, he is warden there. Just like the flowers, you are true, waiting and dreaming a garden of roses. The first reading I'm going to do is just the beginning of my novel. Chapter 1, Running Wild. Running wild, lost control, running wild, mighty bold, feeling gay, reckless too, carefree mind all the time, never blue. Take me to Webster Hall, 119 East 11th Street, Elm directed the hack in front of the Plaza Hotel. It was the address the concierge had given him, along with his card and a flyer for a carnival ball. Already dressed to the nines for a cortege, Elm went in pursuit of a place to recover his confidence. The taxi drove across town, the cobblestone streets, usual clickety-clack, muted by the snowfall. The night wind scattered flakes like shards of broken glass across the dim cast from street lamps. The village echoed the lazy allure of Paris. It reminded Elm of Montmartre, the windmill bathed in red light, the alley of suppressed desire. Elm walked up the steps to the iron canopied entrance to the ballroom. The doorman said, "Got a ticket?" And Elm handed him the business of a card of the concierge. The doorman gave him the once over and said, "The pageant's over, but the jazz band will play until sunrise. I'll just charge you half cover since you missed the new queen being crowned." Elm crossed the threshold into the velvety velour of the previous century with its plush curtained opulent lobby. Cherubs and gingerbread balustrades accented a marble staircase to a balcony of opera boxes. Liquor poured free and without disguise. To his right, a fair contingent of androgynous debauched sheiks and shebas slinked across the marble dance floor. Directly before Elm stood a large wood stage and the band, Fool's Gold. Elm stood. The musicians sat behind the empty thrones of the departed celebrated beauties. They were playing, "How are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris?" "Reuben, I'm not faking, though you might think it's strange, but wine and women play the mischief with a boy who's loose with change. How are you going to keep them away from Broadway, jazzing around and painting the town? They'll never want to see a rake or a plow, and who the deuce can parley-vous a cow?" That ditty always made Elm think of the end of the war. He lit up a Lucky and wandered down a marble staircase. There he found a small horseshoe-shaped bar with convening patrons. They were all men, except one who wore a sash and a tiara. All eyes were focused on Elm, so he squared his shoulders and approached the bar. Sir? Whiskey neat. The guy next to him spoke up. Hey, buddy, don't I know you? He was about the same age as Elm, or a bit younger. He did not slick his hair, but let it curl. He was built like a soldier. I'm not from here, Elm said while he took a sip of his whiskey. Got another fag, the young man said. Sure thing, Elm said as he extracted his cigarette case and handed it to him. My name is Clyde. Elm. The name was not familiar as Elm was bad about names. The face, however. Unusual case, looks like munitions metal, hand carved. Was this from the war? Yes. You must have been there too, Elm questioned, but even as he asked it, he knew the answer. Behind Clyde's eyes lurked that haunted look, a look only recognized by another seasoned soldier. Clyde now turned and Elm saw that his eyes were hazel, with arched brows over a flat nose. He fidgeted. Did you make this in a trench? Clyde's hands trembled over its engraved letters, his nails bit to the quick. Nah, my buddy made it. Nice phrase that, liberté, fraternité, égalité. I haven't thought of that for years, but he left out ou la mort. Perhaps it was too morbid. I'm going to wait till you remember me, Clyde said while he blew smoke rings across the bar. Who'd you fight with? The 99th. An observation boy? We were all boys then. You and I crossed paths? More than once. Was it in Champagne? No, we didn't fight there. Army Air Service was based out of Toul. Correct, but it wasn't there. Elm took a moment to listen to the trumpets of war in his head. They played reveille and allowed the memories to come. Observation, reconnaissance. You had contact with these pilots. They were your eyes. You protected them from enemy attack. Might I partake in another fag? Something about the jocular way he used that term. Then he remembered the guy who was a tramp for cigarettes. Most people called him the tramp, while others bastardized it to the French expression de trop. Clyde was la bouche in the latrine, the court jester with bestial favors. In a series of flashes, he saw three exchanges with this Clyde, a hand-delivered directive from Commander Pershing, aerial photographs taken over Saint-Michel for the Meuse Argonne offensive, and then a shared foxhole. He recalled the foxhole the keenest of all, how they waited together at a radio command station. Without warning, shells hit 250 yards away in no man's land. Then the gas crawled across the ground and rose as it approached like a wall of terror. Elm, Clyde, and the communications man quickly jumped into a trench. Willard! Yes, that's my surname. Saint-Michel via Verdun into the Meuse Argonne offensive? How soon they forget. He offered a dramatic sigh, eyes rolling. And I carried such a torch for you. Paradise lost, Elm said, shrugging. Whatever became of you, Clyde asked, signaling the bartender for 2 more drinks. After the war, I went to Florida to work as a barnstormer. Wow, nifty. So what brings you to our fair city? I'm just here seeing off a good friend. European holiday? Something like that. The one who made this case? No, I never saw that one again. Someone else we fought with, Clyde asked, blowing smoke. Bolt Bratka, Elm said before taking a swig of whiskey. Clyde's eyes popped. The race car driver? How did you come to know such a daredevil? We were all daredevils then, Elm began. It was on Daytona Beach, 1925. Thank you. The second reading and last is takes place in the Burgoyne Casino. And back in the 1920s, a casino wasn't as we think of a casino. It was not a gambling place. It was more of a music hall. It was this particular place is the kind of place you would wear a tuxedo and the lady would wear a gown. And you would go hear music. and have a really nice dinner. Okay. And this introduces all the characters. So it's kind of fun. We're going to start with Ronnie, who is Lady Veronica Vandervoort. She's a race car driver as well. Ronnie languished in a black beaded fringe number with a matching skull cap. Both dripped in ebony and platinum and matched the casino's interior. She paused to flick an ash from her lacquered cigarette holder as she offered a manicured hand to Zella. Howdy, chum. You must be the little flapper flyer. That's me, Zella Bixby. I'm one of Fat's bees. Really? You must be exhausted from flapping your little wings so hard. Huh? Just a joke, kid. You're Lady Veronica Vandervoort, race car driver. I'm a damn good racer no matter what my sex is. Only the Countess calls me Veronica, and no one calls me a lady. My pals call me Ron. No offense, ma'am. None taken. Bolt leaned over and whispered in Ronnie's ear, easy, Tiger. Just showing my fangs. Zella's just a baby, Bolt answered. Ronnie then noticed his eyes as they followed Elm, who crossed the ballroom with a rocks glass. Fair and obsequious, the kind men always fall for, she noted. You talking about Zella or Elm? Either one. Old bean, Elm interjected. I got a glass, now what? Come with me, Bolt instructed. He guided Elm by the elbow towards the men's room. Watch our fare, he yelled to Ronnie as the band launched into Hot Lips. I don't babysit, she barked back. Inside the men's room, strange intimacies were formed. It was risky to be so enclosed like animals and surrounded by mirrors. Conversations became stilted and revolved around sports or weather. Men glanced quickly across urinals and sized up their competitors. It felt like a fight or an orgy could break out at any moment. The attendant might take pity on the vulnerable and whisper, hey buddy, your fly's open, or sir, let me brush off yours too. Attendants were men of color and could be attentive or clumsy. Either way, you were expected to tip them for things easily done by yourself. Here, old man, Bolt said and filled Elm's glass. Elm took a sniff. It smelled like gasoline. Gin? It'll make you sin. You promise? 100 proof, Bolt said with a hit off his flask. Damn, that's strong. Not too sweet? I confess to a sweet tooth. I am savorier. Elm raised an eyebrow. I am sure you are, and you smell nice too. Now the men took swigs and tried to outclever each other with wordplay. It was an intellectual seduction of that which is sure. Slow but sure moves the might of the gods. Listen to the song of life. A trumpet suddenly blared in the far-off ballroom. Is that philosophy? Elm asked and wrinkled his forehead. Something from the Chapin School. Ah, being a poor orphan, I barely attended public. But I was an only child. So was I, technically. There was a stillborn. You're a heartbreaker. Elm had never been teased like this before. He wasn't sure he wasn't being made fun of somehow. Either way, he was intrigued. I hope you don't mean homewrecker. No strings on me, babe. Bolt reached up to correct a cowlick on Elm's head. We better get back to the ladies. Cheer up, cheerio. I don't speak limey. Translation? Keep your pecker up. I'm well trained in that, Bolt said with a wink. Should we? Mustn't be greedy, Bolt said and made for the door. Speak for yourself, brat. With daring, Elm pulled Bolt backwards and slammed him against the wall. He stared at him briefly and then kissed him bang on the mouth. The singer for the band now sang, there's a boy that's in our band and how he blows that horn and everybody on the floor just floats. Elm had never behaved this way. Was Jin the culprit? The attendant turned a blind eye, knowing he would be paid for his diplomacy. Bolt laughed as he pulled away. You're gonna get us into trouble. I'm sure gonna try, Elm said, and then pushed Bolt into a stall. The band played on. They call him Hot Lips, for he blows red-hot notes. That's what they say. Elm had Bolt up against the tile. He slid his tongue into Bolt's mouth, a hand quickly finding its way inside his pants. He kicked down the toilet seat and pushed Bolt into a sitting position. Elm had almost freed himself from his underwear when the attendant knocked. Hey, you men all right in there? You were just dandy, Elm said huskily as he placed a firm hand on his companion, indicating it was time to exit. Bolt cleared his throat. I think I lost a button. Elm unlatched the door and the attendant entered, pretending not to realize what was happening. He got down to look for the button while Bolt stepped over him. The men paused at the basin to straighten themselves. Bolt took a healthy gulp off of his flask. Sir, I can't find the button, offered the attendant. Thanks, Pop, Bolt said and slipped him $1 for silence. Now we're headed back to the table, Elm, so behave. I hear and I obey, Elm said and lifted his glass in a quick salute. The two men returned to the hubbub of the casino. Both were visibly aglow. Ronnie watched them enviously while they swaggered with that lightness of step that a drink can give. Ronnie had seen Bolt this way before. Pardon our absence, Ronnie, but we had to go see a man about a horse, Bolt said as he offered a devilish grin. Elm fought up a blush. Oh shit, by jingo, Ronnie muttered, suddenly understanding the situation. Years ago, she split with Bolt when it became too intense. His dalliances with the same sex were not the reason. She had those herself. She had lied about not loving him. Gazing at Bolt's dumbstruck expression, she realized he was smitten again. He's been clubbed by that hillbilly, and I have to sit listening to this drill from Little Miss Priss 1925? Well, I'll be damned. Did you help him drain his lizard? Ronnie hissed and rolled her eyes at Bolt. I hope you find these circus performers amusing. I consider them very dull, indeed. Geez, Ronnie, I thought you two might hit it off. Not likely, chum. Come on, she's a modern and a risk taker just like us. I am a thoroughbred, and she is a one-trick pony. Elm was silent but gave Ronnie that steely glare. Oh, Ronnie, she's just a kid. So you keep saying, and frankly, I don't give two shits or a fuck. With that, Ronnie stood up and knocked over her chair. Her fox stole fell like a dead thought on the marble floor. Veronica Vandervoort, I should wash out your mouth with soap. I'd like to see you try, or anyone else for that matter, she said, and threw the wrap around her neck. Bolt attempted to lay a calming hand on Ronnie's shoulder. What goes on? This can't be about Zella. Don't touch me or I will put a bullet through your noble head. Why don't you let me drive you home? We can have a nice chat, like old times. Ronnie shut her eyes and defiantly shook her head. Hey, kid, she sounded at Zella. Zella shimmied her way around the table. Yes, Ronnie. Can you do me a favor, she said as she rummaged through her purse. Sure thing. Drive a bitch home. All right, but I come with Elmer. Came, Ronnie corrected. I'm positive Bolt here can get him home safely. Can't you, Bolt boy? Absolutely. Catch Zelly, baby, she exclaimed and threw the keys at Zella's head. Zella snatched them out of the midair. She had just passed Ronnie's first test. All right, kid, Ronnie said. She put her arm around Zella's shoulder. Vámonos, Espositos. As they crossed the dance floor, Ronnie suddenly deflated like a balloon, and Zella half carried, half dragged Ronnie to the exit. The table quickly bounced back to life when the original Dixieland jazz band started to play. Drink, drink, drink. It became apparent that the whole casino was afloat on bootleg liquor. The boys joined arms, and Bolt grabbed Elm tightly against his side. I don't know about you, babe, but I need a drink. Salute. And the band sang, drink, 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 let the toast start. May young hearts never part. Drink, 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 let every lover salute his sweetheart. Let's drink.
Do it. Yeah. Thank you all for coming. We have our authors' books at the counter. Please, if you haven't already picked up a copy, we invite you to and hang out and visit. We'll pick up the chair, so don't worry about that.